Now, the rest of the story. Dad had an aristocrat's temperament in a working man's world. That dichotomy of mentality and reality started him drinking, and he never stopped. The significance of his miserable existence was the misery to which he consequently subjected his family. Not that he was a high liver or a womanizer. He was, in fact, a basically gallant, refined Southern gentleman, deeply loved his wife and small son. His repeated failures simply created in him an unquenchable thirst for whiskey. Often he would disappear for days. Other times, when his whereabouts were known, his son would be sent to retrieve him, and occasionally DTs stood in the way. Once Dad was home again, there flowed the predictable, tearful, impossible promises to reform. Both mother and son knew it would not be. Sporadic sobriety permitted Dad to succeed briefly as a salesman, but his meager, inconsistent income had the family migrating from one Manhattan flophouse to another. Never could they have afforded the luxury of more than one sordid single room at a time. And so in that atmosphere of poverty and uncertainty did a small boy grow. And my, how he wished that he might somehow get a job to help sustain his desperate parents. But considering his age and his size and his mostly fragile physical health, how could he ever earn enough money to make a difference? Well, here's what happened. Somehow that youngster survived the family ordeal, and with a remarkable sense of humor. Gradually he learned that he was not only easily amused, but easily amusing. Now, there's no record of that first joke he sent in to one of the newspapers, nor of how much he may have been paid for it. But this much is certain. That joke was the father of innumerable jokes to come, gags for which that youngster would be reimbursed at $1 apiece. That's right, he became a well-oiled joke machine, tremendously productive. In fact, humor magazines eventually took everything he offered them, including ethnic jokes, such as those that would kill careers 100 years later. But remember, this was the late 19th century, when such humor was not only acceptable but desirable. Jokes about Scottish and Irish, about blacks and Jews, jokes which that little boy invented with almost frightening proficiency. But here's the bottom line. By age 15, that youngster had become his family's chief breadwinner. And for years thereafter, long after he'd set out on his own, he continued to send money to his parents, which from week to week sustained them. So, though many writers began writing because they wanted to, you've just met one who did it because he had to. Now, the history of American literature records and reveres the accomplishments of one passionate socialist author named Upton Sinclair, a crusading literary muckraker who wrote more than 80 books and 20 stage plays, works in which every serious social issue was thoughtfully examined. Remember also is that he got his start peddling politically incorrect humor for $1 a laugh. Of course, now you know why. Now you know the person of Upton Sinclair. Now you know the rest of the story.
And now the rest of the story. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. That was a famous quote from Upton Sinclair. Upton Bill Sinclair Jr. was born in Baltimore, Maryland in September 1878. His father was a liquor salesman and, as Mr. Harvey explained, an alcoholic. Upton's mother, Priscilla Hardin Sinclair, disliked not only alcohol, but tea and coffee as well. She didn't approve of any stimulants, including caffeine. Being the son of an alcoholic was difficult for Upton. For most of his childhood, he didn't have a bed of his own. He slept on the sofa. When there was no sofa, he slept crossways at the foot of his parents' bed. When his father was out, Upton would climb into bed with his mother. Upton's mother, Priscilla, was from an affluent family. Her father, John S. Hardin, was president of the Western Maryland Railroad. Her sister, Maria, married John Randolph Bland, who was the president of the United States Fidelity and Guarantee Company and a millionaire. Now, Upton's father, Upton Sr., also came from a prestigious family. Upton Sr.'s grandfather, Commodore Arthur Sinclair II, fought in the Quasi-War with France, the First Barbary War, and the War of 1812. Upton Sr.'s father, Arthur Sinclair III, was a commander in the United States Navy until the Civil War broke out. Then he resigned his commission and became a commander in the Confederate Navy. Arthur III commanded several ships, including the CSS Winslow, the CSS Mississippi, and the CSS Atlanta. In 1864, Arthur III was in Liverpool, England, searching for a ship to purchase to use as a blockade runner against the Union forces. Finally, he found the right steamship and made all of the necessary arrangements. He named the vessel Lilia after his wife. On January 14, 1865, the Lilia set out for Wilmington, North Carolina, but the ship ran into a storm shortly after departure and sank. One of the few survivors said that his last sight of Arthur was of him kneeling on the deck in prayer. His body was later found and identified by his spectacles and gold watch. Being on the losing side of the Civil War was disastrous for the highly respected Sinclair family. By the time Upton Sinclair, the author, came along, his mother's family was wealthy, but his father's family was poor. Now, Upton Sinclair visited his parents' families and saw their world from two totally different perspectives: filthy rich and dirt poor. He used these perspectives in his writing during the Progressive era. He described the industrialized United States from the point of view of the working man and also from the point of view of the industrialists. Mr. Harvey explained that Upton wrote jokes to help his struggling family. There's a little more to that story. Upton did not start school until he was 10 years old. In 1888, his family moved to Queens, New York, where his father worked as a shoe salesman. Yes, Upton wrote jokes, dime novels, and magazine articles so he could earn enough money to pay his tuition at the City College of New York. He entered the City College when he was just 13 years old. 4 years later, he was earning enough money from his writing to move himself and his parents into an apartment. His father continued to struggle with alcoholism. Now, having a 13-year-old son earning more money than him certainly didn't help with his drinking problem. Upton graduated from the City College of New York in June 1897 and then enrolled to study law at Columbia University. He continued to pay for college by writing jokes and adventure stories. Upton took a variety of classes in addition to studying law, but he was ultimately interested in writing. So far, it had paid for his family a place to live, a college degree, and was paying for a law degree. But he eventually left Columbia University without receiving his law degree and continued to write at a blistering pace. In 1901, he published a book called King Midas. 1902, he published Prince Hagen. 1903, The Journal of Arthur Sterling. And in 1904, he published a Civil War novel called Manassas. Now, publishing 4 books in 4 years is an amazing feat, but they weren't commercially successful. Upton Sinclair had just not found his stride yet. But after publishing Manassas, Upton began working on another book. Although the characters were fictional, the world in which they existed was very real and very harsh. To research his book, Upton worked for weeks in disguise in Chicago's meatpacking plants. Upton knew conditions in the plants were bad, but they were worse than he could have imagined. The unsanitary conditions in the plants was sickening. Working conditions for the poor immigrants was horrendous. All of this he put into a book he published in 1906 called The Jungle. The book instantly struck a nerve and became a bestseller. The public was horrified by what they read. The public demanded change, and change, surprisingly, came quickly. Upton's The Jungle contributed to the passage of the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act. The Pure Food and Drug Act led to the creation of the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, which is now responsible for protecting and promoting public health through the control and supervision of food safety, tobacco products, caffeine products, dietary supplements, prescription and over-the-counter drugs, and much, much more. The Federal Meat Inspection Act of 1906 still ensures that meat and meat products are processed under strictly regulated sanitary conditions. One of my first jobs out of high school was in a chicken processing plant. I got a job on the cleaning crew of the chicken processing assembly line. Everyone told me that I would never eat chicken again if I worked at that plant. But it was exactly the opposite. All of the machines, conveyor belts, even the floor had to be spotless. FDA inspectors, who were easily identifiable in their white lab coats and white hats, used white gloves to check that everything was clean. If they found anything that wasn't absolutely spotless, you had to clean it again. You could not leave for the day until your area was absolutely pristine, no matter how long it took. This drew the attention of the bosses because the next shift of workers had to wait until the FDA inspector approved your area before the line could continue, before they could go back to work. Of course, I had no idea at the time that this book, Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, was largely responsible for the cleanliness of meat processing plants such as the one that I worked in. I'm sure if you ask around, you'll get a large number of horror stories from workers of modern meat processing plants. But let me assure you that things are much better now than before Upton Sinclair came along. I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching. And now you know the rest of the story.